For more than 25 years, Graham Norton has occupied a position in British television that nobody else has quite managed to replicate. He is simultaneously the warmest and the sharpest host on the red sofa, a man who can make a Hollywood legend dissolve into helpless laughter within 60 seconds and then, in the next breath, deliver a line so precisely targeted that the audience gasps before it laughs. He makes it look effortless. That is the illusion he has spent a quarter-century perfecting. But at 62, with enough distance between himself and some of the more memorable disasters of his career, Norton has begun speaking with a candor that his younger, more diplomatically cautious self might have resisted. In a series of interviews, festival appearances, and rare unguarded moments, including a notably frank session at the Cheltenham Literature Festival and separate remarks at the Henley Literary Festival, he has finally said the quiet parts out loud. Not everyone who sat on his famous red sofa was a pleasure. Some of them were, in his words, hell. Here are the 6 guests Graham Norton has gone on record naming as the ones he simply could not stand, and the stories behind each one that explain why. Graham Norton has handled drunk guests before. In an industry where pre-show nerves combine with open bars backstage, the occasional guest who arrives slightly loosened is simply part of professional landscape. Norton has spoken about this reality with characteristic honesty, noting that when someone appears intoxicated on a show, it is almost always because they arrived that way rather than because anything happened in the green room. But of all the guests who ever arrived in that condition, Mark Wahlberg stands as a defining case study, the one Norton has identified clearly and repeatedly as the experience that came closest to genuinely breaking him. The appearance was in 2013. Wahlberg was there to promote the film Broken City, joined on the sofa by Michael Fassbender and Sarah Silverman. By Norton's own account, shared at the Henley Literary Festival, Wahlberg arrived giving no indication of what was coming. He seemed present, personable, and in control. Then approximately 15 to 20 minutes into the show, whatever he had consumed before arriving hit its stride. What followed, Norton told the Henley audience, was hell. Wahlberg began talking over Sarah Silverman mid-sentence. He derailed conversations with non-sequiturs. He climbed onto Norton's lap and wrapped an arm around the host in a gesture that combined physical affection with total conversational collapse. At one point, Fassbender, who Norton described as genuinely trying to salvage the situation, was midway through what seemed like a promising anecdote when Norton glanced at Wahlberg and found him asleep. Asleep on the sofa, on live television, in the middle of another guest story. Norton kept smiling. That is his particular discipline, the ability to hold the surface of professional warmth intact while everything underneath is going wrong. And that night it was tested as fully as it has ever been. Clips from the broadcast went viral almost immediately, generating divided responses. Half the internet found it chaotically entertaining. The other half found it genuinely uncomfortable to watch. Wahlberg, when asked about it later, was breezy about the whole thing. He said he had had a few drinks. He was just having fun, maybe a little too much of it. He did not seem to understand how thoroughly he had tested the patience of a man who is very rarely tested. When Norton has been asked, over the years since, to name his most difficult guest in a single answer, his response has been consistent. Mark Wahlberg. That one was hell. Once was enough. There is a particular kind of difficult guest that is harder to manage than the drunk or the chotic. The guest who is simply absent, not physically absent, present on the sofa, occupying the space, technically available for conversation, but mentally, emotionally, and professionally somewhere else entirely. Mickey Rourke was that guest, and the account Norton has given of that evening in interviews, including one with the New Zealand Herald, makes clear that the experience left a mark that did not fade quickly. Rourke arrived with sunglasses on. He had what was reported to be a bottle of Jack Daniels with him. He slouched back into the sofa with the body language of a man who had agreed to something he immediately regretted. When Norton asked questions, Rourke answered in fragments, clipped, mumbled responses that arrived slowly and led nowhere. When Norton turned to other guests, Rourke stared off into space or occupied himself with his lighter, because despite clear studio rules against it, he kept attempting to smoke. Norton described turning away from him for a moment and turning back to find him lighting another cigarette. He was exhausting, Norton told the New Zealand Herald. He wanted to smoke all the time. It was so boring. You feel like a teacher taking children on a school trip, not a chat show host. The broadcast was edited significantly before airing in an attempt to create something watchable from footage that in its uncut state was close to unusable. Even heavily edited, the tension was visible. The audience, which Norton considers a genuine barometer of how a show is going, responsive to the energy in a room in ways that cameras do not always capture, was uncomfortable. The warmth that usually radiates from the red sofa was simply gone, replaced by a peculiar heaviness that not even Norton's wit could puncture. Rourke, for his part, did not apologize and did not appear to feel he needed to. He has spoken in various interviews about his discomfort with the promotional machinery of Hollywood, with what he considers the performative emptiness of talk show culture. He was not there to be charming, and he made no effort to pretend otherwise. Norton quietly placed him on a do-not-read book list that, years later, has not changed. Not every difficult interview involves excess of any kind. Sometimes the problem is the opposite, an absence so complete, a conversational resistance so thorough, that no amount of professional effort on a host's part can generate the spark that the format requires. Kevin Costner was that problem, and Norton has been candid about it in a way that is notably measured, given that the experience clearly frustrated him deeply. Norton told Express that the Costner interview had a quality he rarely encountered. A man who looked at him as though the very act of being asked to converse was an imposition. "I asked him a question," Norton said, "and he looks at me like, 'Jesus, do I have to talk to this man?'" He gave a half answer. The irony, and Norton noted it with a particular weariness of someone who had watched it happen in real time, was that when Helen Mirren, who was also on the sofa that evening, asked Costner something, he lit up immediately. The reserve disappeared. The engagement arrived. It was not that Costner was incapable of conversation. It was that Norton, specifically in the format Norton represented, was not something Costner was willing to engage with. Norton has reflected on this distinction between guests who are simply private people uncomfortable with the format and guests who are actively resistant to it, with more generosity than perhaps the experience warranted. He acknowledged that some people simply are not built for the talk show couch. The energy it requires, the willingness to be quick and loose and performatively warm in front of a studio audience, is a specific skill that bears no relationship to how gifted someone might be in their actual profession. Costner is a genuinely accomplished filmmaker and actor. He is also, by Norton's account, someone who brought a long and difficult evening to the red sofa and offered very little in exchange for the audience's time. Norton never invited him back. When asked years later, his verdict was crisp. "Lovely man, I'm sure, just not my kind of evening." When the booking is Robert De Niro, expectations are stratospheric. He is one of the most celebrated actors in the history of cinema. The man behind Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull, Vito Corleone in The Godfather Part 2, Jimmy Conway in Goodfellas. The audience on the night of his Graham Norton show appearance arrived knowing they were in the presence of a living monument. They expected something close to revelation. What they received, according to Norton's account at the Cheltenham Literature Festival, was a sustained lesson in the limits of professional patience. De Niro is not, Norton explained, a storyteller. He is not verbal in the way that the talk show format demands. He is still controlled and precise, qualities that make him extraordinary on screen, where the camera can hold on a face and a microbe response communicates more than a paragraph of dialogue. In a conversation on a sofa, with an audience watching and a host waiting, those qualities become their own kind of obstacle. Norton tried everything. He asked leading questions, offered gentle prompts, deployed his considerable gift for drawing people out. Nothing worked in any sustained way. De Niro gave short, careful answers. When he began what appeared to be an anecdote, the room leaned in. Then he stopped. Norton recalled the moment with a specificity that suggests it stays with him. De Niro looked at him mid-story and said, "Why am I telling this?" Nobody had an answer. The segment was cut. Norton, ever gracious in public, described De Niro as a benign presence, which is perhaps the most expertly diplomatic way a professional host has ever described a guest who was a disaster. De Niro has said in other contexts that he does not consider himself a talker, that he prefers to listen. The talk show format requires the opposite. When those two realities collided, only one of them bent. There is a specific quality of difficulty that Graham Norton has described across several interviews as more challenging than anything else he encounters professionally. The guest who is simply not present, not drunk, not combative, not resistant in any active sense, simply absent, somewhere else, delivering monosyllabic responses to questions that deserve full sentences, and staring at a point beyond the cameras as though the studio and the audience and the host and the entire occasion were happening to someone else in a different room. Daryl Hannah was that guest. Norton has said that the experience was excruciating and that he found himself, for one of the very few times in his career, genuinely at a loss. His fallbacks, wit, warmth, gentle teasing, the strategic self-deprecation that usually loosens even the stiffest guest, failed him entirely. Production staff who were present during the taping recalled that Hannah arrived withdrawn and tense, engaging minimally with crew in the period before filming began. Her performance on the sofa matched that pre-show energy, distant, flat, responsive to direct questions with single words that invited no follow-up and generated no momentum. Norton has said that you start to wonder in those situations whether you have done something wrong, said something offending in the green room, struck the wrong tone in the opening moments. The honest answer, he has concluded, is that it had nothing to do with him. Hannah has spoken in her own interviews about a deep discomfort with the performative requirements of promotional culture, the expectation that you will be charming and quick and reliably entertaining on a schedule in front of cameras, whether or not you feel any of those things on a given day. She has described talk shows as something other than conversations, as a kind of performance she has never found natural. Norton understands that perspective intellectually, understanding it did not make the evening easier to survive. All 5 of the guests described above produced evenings that were difficult for professional reasons: alcohol, disengagement, personality clashes, the collision of incompatible energies. The 6th guest on Norton's list is different in kind rather than degree, because the discomfort of the evening he describes was not merely professional. It was something that only became fully explicable years later, when the world learned what Harvey Weinstein had kept hidden for decades. Weinstein appeared on the Graham Norton Show when he was still the most powerful independent film producer in Hollywood, a man whose name on a project could guarantee distribution, critical attention, and award consideration in ways that no one else in the industry could reliably deliver. The studio audience knew who he was. The other guests on the sofa knew who he was. Everyone in the room understood that they were in the presence of someone accustomed to the fullest possible expression of institutional authority. And that authority was on display from the moment he arrived. Norton has described Weinstein as someone who did not simply join the show. He occupied it. He interrupted other guests, redirected conversations toward himself, and filled the room with a particular energy of a man who expects every space he enters to organize itself around his priorities. It was not charming dominance. It was something more uncomfortable. The performative man who had never once encountered a room he could not control and who had no particular interest in making the experience pleasant for anyone else. Norton kept the show moving with the professionalism that is his signature, but the unease did not leave him. He has said that he did not fully understand what he was feeling in that room until years later, when the revelations about Weinstein's conduct toward women became public knowledge. Then the particular quality of that evening, the sense of weight, the cold certainty that this was a man who took what he wanted and expected the world to accommodate him, made complete sense. Norton has also revealed something that illuminates the dynamic further. Weinstein had not been booked on the show through the standard process. He had emailed the production team himself, insisting he be booked, pushing until the answer was yes. At the time, Norton said, he interpreted this as the mark of a good producer, someone accustomed to making things happen through sheer force of will. But of course, he said, at the Cheltenham Literature Festival in 2022, shortly after Weinstein's conviction, now that we know what we know, that's what makes you a predator. That kind of tunnel vision, that refusal to take no for an answer. When asked in 2024 who his worst guest of all time was, Norton's answer was immediate and final. Harvey Weinstein. No competition. Worst guest ever. And in this case, the word worst carries a weight that goes considerably beyond a difficult evening on the red sofa. The Graham Norton Show has been, across its run, one of the most consistently successful talk show formats in the world. Not because Norton books the biggest names, though he does, but because he has an almost unparalleled gift for making human beings reveal themselves in ways they did not necessarily intend to. The format of the shared sofa, the careful sequencing of guests, the particular quality of Norton's questioning, curious rather than confrontational, warm rather than flattering, creates conditions in which people tend to open up. Most of them, the 6 guests described above, represent exceptions. The ones for whom no conditions, however carefully constructed, could bridge the gap between what the show required and what they were willing or able to give. What is notable at 62 is that Norton is talking about these experiences at all. He has spent his career being diplomatically careful in public, protecting relationships and maintaining the goodwill that the industry runs on. The fact that he is now naming names thoughtfully, without cruelty, but with a directness that comes from someone who has decided that honesty is more valuable than the continued management of impressions, says something about where he is in his career and in his life. He has earned the standing to say what he actually thinks, and what he thinks in these 6 cases is both honest and, in the end, rather illuminating about the nature of the work he has done for a quarter century. That making television look easy requires everyone in the room to participate. And when they don't, no amount of talent, preparation, or professional grace can fully hide it. Sources: Graham Norton, Henley Literary Festival Remarks, 2025. Graham Norton, Cheltenham Literature Festival, Multiple Appearances, 2022 and subsequent. New Zealand Herald interview with Graham Norton. The Express interview with Graham Norton. The Independent, People Magazine, BBC Graham Norton Show official broadcast records. Harvey Weinstein Trial and Conviction Records, New York, 2020, Los Angeles, 2023, Entertainment Weekly.